When you hear ALS, your mind probably goes straight to the physical part of the disease, the loss of muscle control. But what we don't always see is the storm that hits the family, the emotional, the financial, and all the logistical chaos. Today, we're going to talk about the unseen lifeline in that storm, the social worker.
So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the shock of that first diagnosis, then we'll walk through the practical stuff, how you actually live with the disease, and finally, how you find peace. And we're going to see it all through the eyes of a social worker who's right there in the trenches.
Okay, so first things first, you have to understand that an ALS diagnosis is so much more than just a physical thing. For the entire family, it's like a psychosocial earthquake. Everything gets shaken up.
Look, the physical symptoms are obviously devastating, but that psychosocial impact, we're talking anxiety, grief, the strain on the family, that is just as massive. And then, on top of all that, about half of all patients deal with cognitive shifts. Some even develop something called frontotemporal dementia, or FTD, which just makes an impossibly hard situation even more complicated. And get this, the scale of the mental health challenge is just staggering. Up to half of people with ALS will experience clinical depression or anxiety. So this tells you right away, mental health isn't some side issue here. It is absolutely central to the ALS experience. And that's exactly why getting skilled support right away isn't just a nice to have, it's essential.
So you have all this chaos, right? How does a social worker even start to bring some order to it? Well, they don't just react. They start by carefully building a blueprint for support.
And the foundation for that whole plan is what they call a 360-degree assessment. But this is not a one-time checklist, not at all. Because ALS moves so fast, it has to be a deep, ongoing conversation. They're looking at absolutely everything, from mental health and caregiver stress to the total nightmares of insurance and getting the right equipment. And this whole approach is guided by this really core idea in social work. It's called the person-in-environment perspective. What it really means is they don't just see a patient with a disease. No, they see a whole person. A mom, a dad, a coworker, living inside their own unique world, and all the support gets tailored to fit that entire reality. So, once they have that blueprint, they open up their toolkit. And these are the real, practical, and emotional things that help families actually live with ALS, not just survive it.
So what does this support actually look like on a day-to-day basis? That's the question every family has. And the answer is this really powerful mix of navigating the system, counseling, and just practical, hands-on support.
Let's take something like getting a power wheelchair. For a family, that can feel like an impossible maze. But the social worker, they break it down into steps. They figure out the need, they find the money from grants or benefits like Social Security disability, they coordinate with all the suppliers, and, this is huge, they fight the insurance company when the claim gets denied. They are absolute expert navigators. But they're also the emotional anchor in all of this. They provide counseling to help people work through the enormous grief and fear that comes with a diagnosis like ALS. Plus, they connect families to support groups, which is so important for breaking through that feeling of isolation and reminding them, hey, you are not alone in this.
Their focus isn't just on the person with ALS, it's on the entire family. They know that caregiver burnout is a massive risk, so they set up respite care to give caregivers that much-needed break, and they provide training to help them sustain themselves for what is a very, very long journey.
And that brings us to one of their most powerful roles, being an advocate. Because as the patient's own voice might start to weaken, the social worker's voice has to get louder. They're fighting for their needs in a system that can be, well, really complex and sometimes pretty cold. And in the real world, this advocacy is just relentless. An insurance company denies a communication device, the social worker files the appeal. A family can't afford a wheelchair ramp, they hunt down the grants. Bureaucracy is holding up a clinic visit, they get on the phone and they make it happen. They are truly tireless problem solvers.
And we have to be honest, this work is incredibly difficult. I mean, you're dealing with a disease that changes month to month, a constant scarcity of resources, and the intense emotional weight of life and death decisions. It takes this unique blend of creativity, resilience, and just deep, profound empathy.
And that brings us to the final chapter of this journey. As the disease progresses, the social worker's focus starts to shift. It moves from fighting the illness to ensuring comfort, dignity, and peace.
And really, this philosophy becomes their guiding star. It's not about adding more days to life, but about adding more life to the days that are left.
The goal is helping patients and their families find meaning and connection, making that time as rich as it can possibly be.
So how do they do that? Well, they coordinate hospice care, making sure a person's home feels like a place of comfort, not just a clinic. They guide those tough but essential conversations about things like advanced directives. And they use these incredible tools, like something called dignity therapy, which helps a person document their life story and their values, leaving a real legacy for their loved ones.
So it all comes down to this question. In a journey that can feel like it's defined only by loss, how do you help create a legacy of resilience and meaning? The work of an ALS social worker really shows us the answer. They provide the support, the resources, and the compassion that empower families to turn a devastating diagnosis into a story of strength, connection, and profound meaning. They are, truly, the lifeline in the storm.